Shall we play a game?
That is a movie reference you are way too young to get. The entire Cold War in one setting. Got to start somewhere. We're going to start at Chapter 2, Section 1. To begin with, what was the Cold War? US, USSR, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics. From 45 to 91, you take a look at the cartoon. That is symbolizing the nuclear weapons that neither side could use. Based upon a fundamental difference of what does the world look like, what should it look like, focus on democracy at home because we weren't always so insistent upon it anywhere else. A classless society, Animal Farm, everybody's equal. It's just some people are more equal than others. And the originators of the Cold War? And remember, it's not cursing if it truly is an asshat. The inventor of the term Iron Curtain, Winston Churchill. It is a figurative closing of the countries that will remain under communist government. As you can see, that is symbolizing puppet governments. So let's sum up the Truman years. Resulting in an arms race, which brings you
right after World War II, after Germany fell and Hitler died, you had the Soviets over here, and they're like, Germany must have a... Because they were mad at Germany for being jerks and stuff. Then there was President Truman over here running America, and he was all against being mean to Germany because he felt bad for them. Except really, he was like, I don't like communism. So he wanted to help Germany, so they'd be like, yes, it's Americans is good, and Soviet Russia is bad. So they'd be all against communism and stuff. Except Truman couldn't just help Germany because Stalin was a big guy and could take him down. So President Truman and Mr. Stalin met at this place in Germany called Potsdam to figure out what they were going to do with Germany. And Truman invited his friend Clement because he would have felt bad if he didn't. So they're all talking and stuff, and Stalin was like, Germany with the wrong country. And he got all angry and wanted to take stuff from Germany. But Truman and his friend were all like, but poor Germany won't have any money and they'll be poor. But Truman was actually thinking about containing communism. Then there were all these little countries that Stalin took over during the war, and he wanted to keep them because he worked hard for them. So Truman sounded like an idiot trying to save Europe, and so all the little innocent countries that Stalin took over remained under communist rule. So then this big, heavy iron curtain came down. It was actually just a metaphor for the division of communist and non-communist nations. Then Truman exploded this big, huge bomb to freak Stalin out. And it was all like... And Truman was all like, what now, huh? What are you gonna do about it? So Truman was angry because Stalin didn't want to let his countries rule themselves. Then Truman called up his pal George and was like, hey George, I don't get why Stalin's being mean. Then George was like, I tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna write a 5,540 word long telegram about Stalin and why he's being such a jerk. So then Truman received this very long telegram that pretty much said Stalin was a sissy and was afraid of the West and feared communist fall. George was like, yeah man, Joseph is pretty serious and he's not going back down. It's impossible. Thanks man, I appreciate it. So then President Truman got an idea. I'm going to contain communism so it doesn't spread. I shall call it containment. Except it didn't sound very nice, so he changed it. I will help weak countries so they can fight communism. Then I shall call it my doctrine. Then Stalin was over here taking stuff from East Germany, so Truman and his British buddy got mad and threatened Stalin with some atomic bombs. Since now that everyone was mad at Soviet Russia, they decided to make a club and call it the We Hate Communist Club. But then they changed it to NATO because it sounded cooler. They also let West Germany join too. So then Stalin got together with his communist buddies and made a communist club. Then everyone was all nervous and stuff because the two clubs kept showing the other club how big they could make stuff explode. And they're afraid that maybe they'd blow each other up. So the entire world was all freaking out because they thought for sure they were going to get the crap blown out of them. That wasn't all though. You also had China over here and they were having personal issues. And this guy named Mao was all for communism, except these other Chinese people weren't. So they were all fighting and stuff. Then Truman sent the anti-communist Chinese people a Fred Meyer's gift card with $2 million on it so that they could buy guns and stuff to fight with. Except there were more communist people, so they kicked the non-communist people's butt. Then all these countries like Korea and Vietnam were getting bullied by communists, and Truman was all like, my doctrine to the rescue! So he jumped in and tried to help them. Then Truman retired and this guy named Dwight became president. And then over in Soviet Russia, Stalin died. Then this guy named Khrushchev took over. Then over in America, there was this guy named McCarthy, and he was all paranoid about communists in America, so he was all like, you're a communist, I can tell! Except he was all mean and stuff, so nobody liked him. So then America was afraid that their local snails were communist spies. Then Russia threw this satellite into space, and America was like, we're stupid. And Kennedy became president and was like, America, I dare you to go go to the moon. And then America did. And all this crap happened with Cuba, and Kennedy was like, I hate my job. Then like a million years later, this guy in Russia was like, this is ridiculous. And him and George H.W. Bush were like, okay, let's stop this nonsense. And the Cold War was over.
And that is pretty much the Cold War. But let's go into a couple more details. As he mentioned, the My Doctrine, or the Truman Doctrine, is focusing on the word contain. Do not allow the spread of communists into countries that are not already communist. And one way to do that is to help those countries that were decimated by the war economically build up. You cannot sell stuff to a country that is a pile of rubble. Now, we offered it to everybody, but we really only meant the non-communist countries.
In Europe, this meant spending a lot of money. First, the Marshall Plan spent $13 billion on rebuilding Western Europe with grants and credits that Europeans would spend on American consumer goods and on construction. Capitalism's cheap food and plentiful stuff, it was hoped, would stop the spread of communism. The U.S. also tried to slow the spread of communism by founding NATO and with CIA interventions in elections where communists had a chance, as in Italy.
And if you remember China, Chiang Kai-shek's our friend, Mao Zedong not so much. How did we lose?
China, there's a new China in China. What's on the menu? Communism. No thanks, said the other China, escaping to an island. I wonder which one is the real China. There's the Korean War, Korea versus Korea. Nobody wins, then it's on pause forever. Let's meet the sponsors. Oh, it's the two global superpowers. They're having a friendly debate over which economic system is good and which one is an evil virus of Satan. And they both have atom bombs. Fight! Wait, no, that would be the end of the world. Let's just keep it cool and spy on each other instead. And make sure we have enough atom bombs.
And one of the first challenges of the Truman Doctrine and containment is the Korean War, which goes so swimmingly for him. The Korean War is still continued under the Dwight Eisenhower administration. Four distinct phases of the war. Today, Korea is still divided at the 38th parallel, and we keep roughly 40,000 American troops in South Korea to keep the peace. Now we move on. Our cartoon mentioned McCarthy.
Homer? What the hell are you doing now? Risking my life to save people I hate for reasons I don't quite understand. Gotta go.
So everybody has to pledge their loyalty because we all know communist spies cannot lie.
He's a very strange young man.
He's an idiot. Comes from upbringing. Parents are probably idiots too. Lorraine, you ever have a kid who acts that way, I'll disown you.
Back to the Future. That is actually Lorraine's kid. It's all about consumerism and how much do you hate communists.
Are you now? Or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
They managed to find almost no communists, but destroy quite a few lives. So it all evened out.
Sell crazy someplace else. We're all stocked up here.
Which brings us to the head crazy.
When I rule the earth, you will be the first on my list.
So we had a list.
We try to remember we're a military organization.
But it wasn't a real list. And when people got a look at who he really was, they were not impressed.
Joe McCarthy was one figure who came along and turned anti-communism into something bigger and more dangerous than anyone else ever imagined. He was the demagogue of American anti-communism. He wasn't the inventor of it.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many.
McCarthy is a person who, for what he thought were the right reasons, did all the wrong things. McCarthy said, well, the way I read our rules, I can investigate anything.
The fight will continue, regardless of how rough the opposition gets, and rough it will be.
But they never proved anything. They just made lots of allegations.
And newspapers kept reporting McCarthy's allegations.
He tells a lie, and by the time you've responded to that, he's told 3 others, but it's sold papers.
You have this figure at the center of American politics who is reckless, who is destroying lives, who is creating polarization.
Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency.
And lucky for us, since that time, we've had no polarization like that at all. ICBM stands for Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. It will take off on our continent and land on yours, which makes us scared. So we make kids hide under desks, because everybody knows desks are atomic bomb proof. As our nation turns to panic, people decide to build bomb shelters in the backyard, deluxe versions, or on the cheap. And if hiding under desks was not enough to traumatize our elementary kids, we brought them.
He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. First, you'll have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes. You will know when it comes. We hope it never comes, but we must get ready. It looks something like this. There is a bright flash, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything you've ever seen. If you were not ready and did not know what to do, it could hurt you in different ways.
I'm sure most first graders could figure that out. Oh my gosh, we're already at section 4. Eisenhower's going to come up with massive retaliation as we move from that minuscule atomic bomb. You need to set off an atomic bomb just to get a hydrogen bomb to go off. Which sets up MAD, mutually assured destruction. You won't attack us because you know we will blow you off the planet.
Both sides developed nuclear arsenals, the Soviets initially with the help of spies who stole American secrets. Eventually, the nuclear arsenals were so big that the US and USSR agreed on a strategy appropriately called MAD, which stood for Mutually Assured Destruction.
And we wanted to make sure that we could destroy you, so the triad. B-52s are in the air 24 hours a day. ICBMs, many of them located in Nebraska, by the way, and nuclear submarines never know where they're at. So this whole period of time, the American public living in fear, and rightfully so. Also a time of spies, covert, that means secret. Just a couple of examples. Democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh will be run out of town by Teddy Roosevelt's nephew and a suitcase full of money. It has something to do with why Iran is not particularly happy with us today. Guatemala, there were more. As we move to space, the Russians will be the first to arrive with their satellite. That's a spy plane. They told the world they shot one down. We said, no, you didn't. We were nowhere near. Then they had pictures and we're like, well, it was a weather plane. Then they're like, we have the pilot. Okay, it was a spy plane, but you do it too. If we flash back to the Cold War in space, doggone it, they've beat us to space with men as well. But John Glenn makes it all the way around, and then eventually the Apollo project.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
UFO didn't actually show up until much later. As Germany was split in half, the capital Berlin was split in half, which meant the communist eastern half could just walk into the western half. To stop that from happening, we have to build a wall, Or actually, it's not we, it's they. And then here's some of that stuff that made Kennedy hate his job. We discovered they had nuclear missiles in Cuba. Now, they put them there because we had nuclear missiles in Turkey, but we don't like to talk about that because then it makes the whole thing our fault. Curtis LeMay, bomb everything. Isn't that his answer for everything? We stared the Soviets down eyeball to eyeball, and they blinked. We would prefer not to come that close to destroying the world again. We need better communication. Only Drake joke of the year. But they truly did have a red phone, the hotline. Kennedy, truly shot by Lee Harvey Oswald, who was then shot by Jack Ruby, and then America couldn't believe that some crazy loner in Texas could kill the president, so he decided it was the CIA, the Mafia, Castro, LBJ, Teamsters, Freemasons, Cubans in the sewer, whatever.
Good morning, Vietnam!
How did we make it to the Vietnam War already? A guerrilla, farmer by day, soldier by night, you can't tell who's who, and I can't get my dog to stop barking. The guerrilla wins if he does not lose. The conventional army loses if he does not win. That's Mao Zedong. And the Viet Cong were willing to tunnel themselves into the earth. You see that's very intricate. Kitchens, bathroom, wells, ammunition depots. There's an actual entrance. Those are booby traps. There's another one. And there's a couple more. Trip lines. We'll blow you up on land or in the water. College students decide they're not necessarily cool with this.
By 1968, there were about 500,000 American soldiers in Vietnam, and the government was confidently saying that victory was just around the corner. But then in January, Vietnamese forces launched the Tet Offensive, and while it was eventually repelled, the fact that the North Vietnamese were able to mount such an offensive cast doubts on the claims that U.S. victory was imminent. The Vietnam War itself was particularly brutal, with much of the ground fighting taking place in jungles. Rather than large-scale offensives, troops were sent on search and destroy missions, and often it was difficult to tell enemy from civilian. Capturing territory wasn't meaningful, so commanders kept track of body counts, like if more enemy were killed than Americans, we were winning. In addition to jungle fighting, there was a lot of bombing. Like, more bombs were dropped on North and South Vietnam than both the Axis and Allied powers used in all of World War II. The US used chemical defoliants like Agent Orange to get rid of that pesky jungle, and also napalm, which was used to burn trees, homes, and people. Television coverage meant that Vietnam was the first war brought into American living rooms, and people were horrified by what they saw. They were especially shocked by the My Lai massacre, which took place in 1968, but was only reported a year later in 1969. These draftees were young and disproportionately from the lower classes because enrollment in college or grad school earned you a deferment. So unlike previous American wars, the burden of fighting did not fall evenly across socioeconomic class.
And it all came to a head in the presidential election of 1968. If Robert Kennedy had not been assassinated, you would probably be living in a very different world. Instead, we got Richard Nixon, who moved to end the war with his secret plan. And the secret was, he didn't really have a plan. But, based upon recorded conversations from the Oval Office, he's talking to Henry Kissinger, who is a convicted war criminal, so if he ever leaves our nation, he will be arrested. Nixon was the one that said, "Goddamn concerned about the civilians. I don't give a damn. I don't care. I'd rather you use the nuclear bomb. Does that bother you? I just want you to think big." John Green mentioned the My Lai massacre. William Calley, in charge of the unit, will go to jail, but just for a little bit. Back at home, Kent State University in Ohio. If we had time, I would play you a really good song called Ohio. 4 students dead, 11 wounded. Jacksonville State University, they were killed by state troopers. This was a traditionally black college, so it got a whole lot less publicity than the white middle-class students in Ohio. That's frustrating, especially if you have people shooting at you all the time that's going on. Yeah, that pretty much reads, we didn't win. Last thing, after all of this, that you really need to know is the fact that there is a world for you to live in. We were just lucky. Hope not.